Imagine the North Atlantic in 1941. It's night. A convoy of merchant ships crawls across black water, each one stacked with food, fuel, and weapons desperately needed in Britain. Somewhere beyond the horizon, unseen U-boats are waiting. A message crackles over German radio, a string of letters that sounds like nonsense. To the men on those ships, those letters are life or death. Somewhere in the English countryside, in a quiet, unassuming mansion, a young mathematician is staring at those same impossible letters and trying to turn nonsense into meaning. His name is Alan Turing, and though few people then had ever heard of him, his work would tilt the balance of the Second World War. The contrast between the two worlds could not have been sharper. Out at sea, chaos, explosions, flares, the sickening tilt of ships going under. Back in England, at Bletchley Park, the war sounded different. The soft clatter of typewriters, the hum of electric motors, the scratch of pencils across paper. No uniforms in the trenches here, just cardigans, bicycles, cigarette smoke, and stacks of intercepted German messages. And in the middle of this peculiar, cerebral battlefield was Turing, awkward, brilliant, often disheveled, and quietly taking on the most powerful encryption machine the world had ever seen. Alan Matheson Turing did not look like anyone's idea of a war hero. Born in London in 1912 to a middle-class family, he spent much of his childhood being shuttled between relatives and boarding schools while his parents lived in India for his father's job. As a schoolboy, he was odd, dreamy, more interested in puzzles and chemistry experiments than in fitting in. Teachers complained that he was careless, that his handwriting was poor, that he didn't respect the classical curriculum. But when it came to mathematics, he saw patterns and possibilities that others missed. It wasn't the neatness of equations that drew him in, it was the challenge of what problems you could force mathematics to tackle. One of the defining relationships of Turing's youth was with a fellow student, Christopher Morcom. They shared an intense intellectual bond, poring over science and mathematics together. For Turing, it was also a first unspoken love. When Christopher died suddenly of tuberculosis at 18, Turing was devastated. That loss pushed him deeper into abstract thought, toward questions about mind, matter, and what it meant for something human or machine to think. In a strange way, grief sharpened his focus. It turned his curiosity from schoolboy cleverness into something more driven, more philosophical, and ultimately more revolutionary. By the early 1930s, Turing was at King's College, Cambridge, in a world where pure thought was taken seriously. Cambridge was the kind of place where the biggest questions in mathematics and logic weren't tea-side discussions, they were the main event. One of those questions was deceptively simple: what can be computed? At the time, giants like David Hilbert had dreamed of a method, a mechanical procedure that could, in principle, decide the truth or falsehood of any mathematical statement. If you think about it, that's like asking whether there exists a perfect machine for reasoning, one that could settle every problem if you just fed it the right data. Turing attacked this problem with a strange kind of thought experiment. He imagined a very simple machine, just a tape, divided into squares, and a read-write head that could move left or right, erase or write symbols, and change its internal state according to a list of rules. It was an almost embarrassingly primitive device, but that was the point. Turing showed that this imaginary machine could, in principle, do any calculation a human following an algorithm could do. Today we call it the Turing machine, and it became the foundation of computer science. But in the 1930s, it was a piece of pure, abstract mathematics, written up in a paper with the dense title on computable numbers, with an application to the Entscheidungsprobe. Little did the academic world know that this theoretical machine, born from a young man's grief and intellectual curiosity, would soon become the key to unlocking the secrets of a real-world war machine. The abstract puzzle was about to become terrifyingly real, and Turing was the only one who held the key. What if the most important weapon of World War II wasn't a tank, a plane, or a bomb, but a mind? A mind that saw the limits of machines and then built one to decide the fate of nations. This is the story of Alan Turing, a man whose genius was as unconventional as it was profound. On the surface, Turing's early work had nothing to do with war. He was a mathematician, exploring the very boundaries of what could be computed. In a groundbreaking paper, he proved that no single machine could solve every mathematical problem. The Germans were using a seemingly unbreakable cipher machine, the Enigma. It had an astronomical number of settings. We're talking more possibilities than there are atoms in the sun. The Germans changed these settings every single day. For the Allies, every midnight was a complete reset. Cracking it seemed utterly hopeless. And that's exactly the kind of problem Alan Turing loved. He was summoned to a secret country estate called Bletchley Park, a ramshackle mansion filled with a strange collection of scholars, chess champions, and crossword fanatics. Their mission: turn garbled German radio chatter into life-saving intelligence. Turing realized the Enigma machine was complex, but the people using it were human. They were lazy, they made mistakes. They used predictable phrases like, weather report. He called these cribs. If you could guess a piece of the original message, you had a tiny foothold. But how do you turn a tiny guess into a broken code? Turing's answer was a machine of his own, the bomb. This wasn't a bomb that exploded. It was a weapon against ignorance. It was a hulking, whirring beast of wires and rotating drums that simulated dozens of Enigma machines at once. It didn't just try every setting. It used logic. Given a crib, the bomb would rapidly rule out millions of impossible settings, leaving just a handful of possibilities for the codebreakers to test. It was the marriage of human intuition and machine speed. And it worked. Suddenly, once secret German communications were being read daily. This intelligence, codenamed Ultra, was so valuable it was classified above most secret. Nowhere was this more critical than in the Battle of the Atlantic. German U-boats were sinking supply ships at a terrifying rate, threatening to starve Britain into submission. Naval Enigma codes were the toughest to crack. For months, the U-boats operated in darkness. Turing led the charge. He even went to sea to understand the Navy's real-world problems. Slowly, painstakingly, his new statistical methods broke through. By reading U-boat communications, the Allies could steer convoys away from wolf packs and hunt the hunters. Historians estimate that the work at Bletchley Park, driven by Turing's intellect, shortened the war by at least 2 years. That's millions of lives saved. Yet, the man behind it all was a total enigma himself. He was painfully shy, chained his tea mug to a radiator, and was known to run to work, nearly qualifying for the Olympic marathon team. He was a misfit among misfits. A genius who couldn't be bothered with social graces. When the war ended, Bletchley Park vanished. The machines were destroyed, the secrets buried, and the codebreakers sworn to silence for life. Turing, unable to speak of his monumental achievements, After the war, Alan Turing's focus shifted. He moved to Manchester University, where some of the world's first true computers were being built. His mind raced ahead, not just thinking about how to build these machines, but what they could one day do. In 1950, he published a paper asking a revolutionary question: can machines think? To answer it, he proposed a simple but profound experiment: the imitation game, now known as the Turing test. If a machine could talk to a human, and the human couldn't tell it was a machine, wouldn't that mean it was intelligent? This pragmatic approach sidestepped endless philosophical debates and laid the groundwork for the entire field of artificial intelligence. Once again, Turing's genius had leaped decades into the future. But the world he lived in was about to drag him back into its darkest corners. In 1952, Turing's private life collided with the brutal laws of the time. After reporting a burglary at his home, he honestly admitted to the police that he was in a relationship with another man. Instead of helping him, they charged him with gross indecency, the same law used against Oscar Wilde. Given the choice between prison and a horrific, hormonal treatment meant to cure him, Turing chose the latter. This chemical castration caused humiliating physical changes, but the professional damage was just as severe. His security clearance was revoked. The man who had been a key to Britain's survival was now deemed a security risk simply because of who he loved. 2 years later, at just 41, Alan Turing was found dead. A half-eaten apple lay by his bed. The official verdict was suicide by cyanide poisoning. Some have speculated it was an accident, but the haunting image of a brilliant mind, persecuted for forbidden knowledge, dying next to a bitten apple, has stuck with us. The tragedy is that Turing died in disgrace, his monumental contributions to the war effort a closely guarded secret. For decades, his name was a mere footnote in technical history, his story locked away. Then slowly, the truth began to emerge. In the 1970s, as information about the codebreaking at Bletchley Park was declassified, the world started to understand its decisive role in winning the war. Historians pieced together the story, and one name kept appearing: Alan Turing. Biographies were written, and as computers became a part of our daily lives, his early papers started to look less like theory and more like prophecy. The very way our computers work today echoes his ideas from the 1930s and 40s. With this new understanding came a wave of moral outrage over how he was treated. In 2009, the British Prime Minister issued a formal, public apology for the appalling and utterly unfair persecution of Turing. This was followed by a royal pardon in 2013. And later, the Turing Law, which pardoned thousands of others convicted under the same discriminatory laws. Statues appeared. His face was chosen for the new £50 note, a powerful symbol of how a nation that once branded him a criminal now celebrates him as a national hero. Today, we rightly call Turing the father of computing and a war hero. But his story is also a stark reminder that a society can exploit someone's brilliance while simultaneously rejecting their humanity. The same cold logic Turing used to defeat the Enigma machine couldn't protect him from the irrational prejudice of his own country. Every time we discuss the ethics of AI or the balance between privacy and security, we are asking questions that he first posed. Alan Turing never fired a gun, but in the quiet huts of Bletchley Park, he wielded the ultimate weapon: pure reason. He helped save the world, and in return, that world broke him. Perhaps the best way to honor his legacy is to not only remember the war he helped win, but to build a world where no one is ever destroyed for who they are, especially after they've saved us from what we might have become. Thanks for watching.